Hey guys, Crab Warrior here. FNAF is in a really different place now than when it came out 10 years ago. FNAF was originally a little indie game whose popularity blew up due to its simple gameplay mechanics, effective atmosphere, and its unique way of telling its story. However, the most recent games are a far cry from the original in many ways. Things like free roam, much more active gameplay, and a more concise way to even learn the game. It's all super different, and it made me ask the question, when did FNAF stop being FNAF? To answer this, we have to go back to the very beginning, to before FNAF was even made. We all know the story of Chipper and Sons, the game that was the direct inspiration for FNAF. But don't worry, I'm not telling that same story. We've heard it hundreds of times if you watch videos like these a lot. No, I want to talk about one of Scott's other games, Sit and Survive. Although Chipper and Sons did definitely inspire the atmosphere in the first FNAF games, like the animatronics, Sit and Survive is the basis for the most important gameplay mechanics. I assume many of the people watching are aware of what the game is, but for those who don't know, Sit and Survive is a game where you sit and survive. Thrilling. But actually, Sit and Survive is just a simple resource management game, balancing health, thirst, and hunger, all while defending yourself from threats. Such as bears? This game really does seem like a non-scary FNAF in many ways. However, the main mechanic I want to talk about is the resource management aspect. In FNAF, you have to defend against 4 animatronics by closing the doors on them, but there is a 5th threat, the power. The power in FNAF acts as a sort of punishment for being too scared. If you keep the doors closed too long, you run out of power and you die. If you look at the cameras for too long, you run out of power and you die. You get the point. This mechanic was a cornerstone of FNAF when it was released, and I think it's definitely the first thing that would define FNAF from a gameplay perspective. Now that we've talked about the survive of Sit and Survive, I think we should talk about how the sit aspect further inspired FNAF. The first thing someone will notice upon starting night 1 of FNAF 1 is that the player can't move. Other horror games at the time, and even now, have always been free roam, but FNAF was different. It sat the player firmly in the position of the office, and you couldn't run even if you wanted to. This was a defining feature of the fear aspect of FNAF, but it also made the game really reactive. Wait for the animatronics to do something, then you have to do something in return to keep them away. I think this is the second defining feature of FNAF as a game, a reactive gameplay loop. Now I know that last section was pretty short, but don't worry, the last 2 ideas we talked about are going to kind of get extended in this one. Since we already established the first thing you see when you play FNAF, let's talk about the first thing you hear.
Hello? Hello?
This is the phone guy. He's your teacher throughout the first 3 FNAF games. Each one might have a different phone guy. I like to think that FNAF 1 and 2 share the same phone guy, but then FNAF 3 obviously has a different one, that being Phone Dude. But either way, in the first 2 games at least, he has worked that position before you.
I actually worked in that office before you.
So since he worked there before you, he must be like at least a good teacher, right? Well, he's okay. He gives you the very general idea, but he does leave you in the dark about a lot of things, like when he says,
And remember to close the doors only if absolutely necessary. Gotta conserve power. Alright, good night.
if you've played FNAF before, you know that only if absolutely necessary means if they're right outside your door and you turn on the lights and see them. However, if you're new to the game, you might see a character in the hallway or the corner and think that's when you need to close the door. The phone guy even straight up lies to you sometimes, like when he says,
Try playing dead. You know, go limp.
So we have an at least somewhat unreliable teacher in the first game, but I don't really know what to call this other than just phone guy, so I think the third defining feature of a FNAF game would just be the phone guy. Okay, we're almost done defining the game, don't worry. But this section I would really like to linger on the least, but I do recognize that it's important. FNAF 1's story was very simple compared to what we have now, but the way the game told you the story was very unique for the time. Things on the cameras changing to something different, something that tells you the story of missing kids that haunt the suits and why they're coming for you. And the phone guy referencing some sort of bite of 87. The Easter eggs in this game really help set the tone, and that's the fourth and final defining feature of FNAF, the lore, or at least how it's told. Okay, now that we have the 4 defining features of FNAF, we can finally answer the question I posed at the beginning of the video. Let's start by going through the games in order till we find one that doesn't meet the criteria. This won't take too long, trust me. First, let's talk about FNAF 2. FNAF 2 came out a few months after the first game, and despite being a more complex game with 7 more animatronics and a few new mechanics, it's still similar in many ways. In the terms of FNAF 2 being a resource management game, there's actually 2 things to keep track of now instead of 1. Number 1 is the flashlight power, and number 2 is the music box. Both of these things will cause you to die if you run out of them for too long, but the music box is different. In the first game, when you would run out of power, it wouldn't come back, and same with the flashlight power in this game. However, the music box is a renewable source. You get to keep it going, which is an idea that only branches from this game, not technically the first. We'll come back to that idea in a bit, but for right now, we know that FNAF 2 at least has one of 4 requirements for a FNAF game, so let's keep going and look at the other 3. Next up, we have to talk about the phone guy. So FNAF 2 does have a phone guy, but he's more knowledgeable than his FNAF 1 counterpart. Although he never worked as a night guard, most of what he says is actually definite rather than guessing.
We've given you an empty Freddy Fazbear head. You can put it on any time. Eventually anything that wandered in will wander back out.
This is different than the phone guy in FNAF 1, but we still do get misled by the phone guy in FNAF 2, like when he says,
"There's a music box. It doesn't seem to affect all of the animatronics, but it does affect one of them."
If you played the game, you know the music box only works on the puppet, but when he says that, it almost seems like he's saying, oh, it might work on some of the other ones, you'll just have to find it out, but the music box doesn't affect any of the other animatronics, as we know. So I do think that means that FNAF 2 has 2 of the 4 requirements to be a FNAF game, so there's only 2 more. Also, I realize I did it out of order as I'm editing. Don't mind that. I'm just going to go out of my way and say that FNAF 2 has a reactive gameplay loop just like FNAF 1. I feel like I don't really need to explain that too much. The only proactive aspect could be keeping the music box wound up to a really high extent, but that does become a reactive loop if it starts to run too low. So yeah, FNAF 2 has 3 out of the 4 defining features of a FNAF game. The lore in FNAF 2 does fit within the bounds I gave for the definition of a FNAF game, only being given to the player through the phone guy's words and Easter egg death minigames. There's a chance you could never encounter the deeper lore of this game similarly to FNAF 1 if you don't go out of your way to look for it, in this case by dying. So FNAF 2 has all 4 of the defining features of a FNAF game, so therefore, it's a FNAF game. Let's move on to FNAF 3 and see if it also contains all 4 defining features. FNAF 3 is a very different animal from the first 2 games, but it's not where FNAF stopped being FNAF. I'm going to start with the easiest defining feature, the phone guy. FNAF 3 does have a phone guy, lovingly named Phone Dude. He is the most inexperienced phone guy in the series and doesn't really teach you much about how to defend yourself. He more so hints at gameplay mechanics such as poor ventilation and using the audio lures in general. This is similar to the phone guy in FNAF 1, being more inexperienced, not exactly telling you what to do, so we know that FNAF 3 has at least one of 4 defining features. Moving on, let's talk about the resource management aspect of FNAF 3. Yes, it is a resource management game. However, its resource management reflects FNAF 2's music box rather than FNAF 1's power. Your ventilation, cameras, and audio can all go out, and it's your job to reset them. The only thing you can really keep track of, though, is your audio lures, but they are still all resources that need to be managed. My only gripe is that technically, only your ventilation and audio lures can cause you to die if they go out. The camera system is unnecessary. I know this because I actually beat the game blindfolded. Shameless plug. But at the end of the day, it is still a resource management game, because you do still need to balance your audio and your ventilation. The ventilation can cause other issues, so every time the screen blinks fully black, Springtrap has a guaranteed movement opportunity. And every time, I don't know if it's every time it blinks black or just over time, you can see multiple Springtraps. So these are still very important resources you need to manage. So FNAF 3 does get another point towards being a FNAF game, so it's halfway there. Jumping ahead to the lore, FNAF 3 shakes things up a bit. With a playable minigame between each night, the lore is given to you much more directly than the other games. You may think that this means FNAF 3 fails the lore requirement given when defining a FNAF game. However, if you only play the post-night minigames, you're met with the bad ending, which means you don't know the whole story yet. The way to figure out the whole story is by getting the good ending, which you have to do by getting tasks done, which you learn in the post-night minigames, and then the minigames that you unlock by doing the tasks themselves have even smaller minigames inside them where you have to deliver cake to 5 kids, all to give the Golden Freddy child his happiest day. Because this game has hidden minigames that tell the story along with the story being given to you through the phone guy and the post-night minigames, this is generally in line with the definition I gave for FNAF 1's lore, so FNAF 3 gets another point. The last definition here is a bit wonky. FNAF 3 is generally a more proactive game, needing to trap Springtrap on certain cameras and like use audio lures and to seal the vents and keep him over there for the whole night so he doesn't get close to you. That's like a more proactive thing. However, like the phantoms are generally reactive threats. BB, you have to get off the cameras quickly. Same with Mangle. Same with Chica and the puppet. Foxy, you have to see him for a second, then look away. Same with Freddy. It's a mix of both. It is a weak point for FNAF 3, I will say, but because it has the other 3, and it has some aspect of reactive gameplay, I still think it should be considered a FNAF game. Okay, we made it to FNAF 4. You all saw the thumbnail, you know what's coming. FNAF 4 is not a FNAF game, at least in the ways I've laid out in this video. Let's start with the easiest one, the phone guy. He is nowhere to be found in this game. You are handed the instructions on a silver platter. A big text box tells you exactly how to defend against all the animatronics. This concept is inspired the other games like UCN and Sister Location's Custom Night, and I'm really not a fan of it. The phone guy gave the games an air of uncertainty. You didn't know exactly how to defend against the animatronics. You generally had an idea. In FNAF 1, you definitely knew what to do, but you didn't know when. This game doesn't have that. You know exactly what's happening. The phone guy isn't the only criteria for a FNAF game, though. What about resource management? There's no resource to manage in FNAF 4. Your flashlight will always hold a charge, and you can close the doors as long as needed. Obviously not as long as you want. The animatronics will kill you if you have it closed for too long. But the closest thing to a resource to manage in the game is the Freddles. They kinda act similarly to the puppet in FNAF 2. But I hardly count this as a resource. I already kind of stretched it by saying that the puppet was a resource. It's just an enemy and a mechanic to manage rather than a resource to manage. Okay, so it's not a resource management game. There's no phone guy, but it's a reactive game at least, right? No. FNAF 4 is the most proactive game in the series thus far. In fact, it's so proactive, Foxy can sometimes be negated altogether if you're quick enough, and the primary max mode strategy for this game involves never letting the animatronics get to your door, so you never even have to react to them breathing. Not to mention the fact that Scott added quote-unquote movement to the game, which obviously it's not real movement, but it is like a predecessor to the free roam that will come in the future of the series. FNAF 4, I'm not gonna lie, it's not looking the best for you right now. Okay. So it's not a resource management game, not a reactive game, and there's no phone guy. Is the lore at least told in the same way? It's just really not. There are Easter eggs in FNAF 4, but they're hardly used to tell the main story. They only give you the ideas that this is all in a dream and that you're in a hospital.
Why am I at a hospital?
You ain't from Michigan if you never done this before.
Not to mention that every night has a post-night minigame like FNAF 3, but these minigames are practically completely laid out for you, even with text telling you exactly what's going on. The games do contain some Easter eggs, but it's not to the level of FNAF 1, 2, or even 3. So I don't think FNAF 4 is a FNAF game. But with all that being said, I don't dislike FNAF 4. It's just when FNAF stopped being FNAF. It doesn't even mean I dislike the series now or the direction it's gone. That's all it is. It's just gone a different direction. I still love FNAF. FNAF 4 is one of the games I replay the most. I fucking love FNAF 4. It's just, I'm aware that that game is when things started to change. And if you don't agree with me that it's when FNAF changed, I think you can agree that at least FNAF 5 is when it changed, because that is such a change from form. I just think it was one game before that where we could truly see FNAF was going down a different path from the original games. And again, that's okay. I still really love FNAF 4, and I still love all the games after that except FNAF's sister location. Fuck Five Nights at Freddy's sister location. But I hope you all enjoyed this video. And if you disagree with me, leave a comment talking about your opinion on FNAF and why you disagree with me. I'd love to hear it. And I hope you all have a great day. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe and comment what you might want to see me play or cover next. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.